Now, Congressman, your Republican colleagues, and I wonder if you hear this when you're actually on the ground at the Capitol, but they're accusing your party of constantly opposing whatever the president does, regardless of whether it's good for the country or not good for the country. There's always pushback from the Democrats. You and your colleagues just want to upend this president's agenda. Is that what's happening right now with this MOU with Iran?
No, I actually support the agreement and bringing the war to an end. I have always supported bringing the war to an end. I will say, though, that this agreement is not as good as what the JCPOA was. And let me just give you three factual reasons. First, under the JCPOA, 97% of the enriched uranium was removed from Iran. Under this agreement, it simply dilutes it. Second, the JCPOA had the Security Council resolution as a force of law with intrusive IAEA inspections. That still has not been achieved. And most problematically, we're going to be on the hook to raise $300 billion for Iran's economic development and reconstruction. Not U.S. taxpayer money, but raising that money. Why aren't we focused on the economic development and reconstruction of Middleton, Ohio, Johnstown, Pennsylvania? We're putting $300 billion to be raised for child care or health care for Americans.
Well, all very important points and good ones. Let me just say that President Trump has made the comment that at some point in the future, when things calm down, the U.S. will go back into Iran, get that uranium, destroy that uranium, whether destroyed in Iran or in America or somewhere else. They are planning on getting that. And in terms of your point, in terms of rebuilding America and Ohio and all the middle American states, I mean, that's exactly what President Trump is doing. You know that. He boasts about $18 trillion of investments into America. He got corporate America to either pay up on tariffs or build it at home. He's the first president that actually focused on not relying on China when it comes to pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. So you know that. I mean, we haven't even, the fact that Congress allowed the United States to have 90% of our pharmaceuticals made in China is beyond me. And that's something I will never understand. And I got to say, this deal seems a lot better than the horrendous Obama deal, because Obama allowed Iran to have access to $100+ billion. Let's not forget all that cash, cold cash that was on a plane headed to Iran, which, what did they do with that money, Congressman? They used that money to build up their ballistic weapons and support terrorist proxies. Am I wrong?
Maria, first of all, the president has lost 72,000 manufacturing jobs under his watch. So I wish you were right, because his rhetoric was about rebuilding Ohio, rebuilding Pennsylvania, but he has resisted having an industrial investment bank to actually support American manufacturers that would make things that we're currently importing.
No, I don't agree with that. That's not true.
On the China committee. Let me just finish. I mean, it's true he hasn't put an industrial investment bank. It's true that he's lost 70,000 manufacturing jobs. I'm the top Democrat on the China committee. We've been urging him to do a CHIPS Act for American pharmaceutical key starting material. He hasn't done that. Yes, he's attracted a lot of foreign direct investment that's gone to tech companies in my district, but what about the heartland and the building up of places that were deindustrialized? That simply hasn't happened. It hasn't happened in Vice President Vance's hometown of Middleton, Ohio. But on this deal, I mean, he's talking about $300 billion to Iran, and he's unfreezing $24 billion, and then he's been criticizing Obama for what happened when Obama unfroze the money. That's just hypocrisy. Obama actually got the enriched uranium out. He hasn't. Obama had extensive IAEA engagement and inspections, and even people on his side are saying, you know, you didn't need a 3-month war to get this. You could have gotten all of this without that war. Now, I'm being reasonable. I'm urging my Democrats to support it because I want the war to end. I want diplomacy. But the lesson from this should be that you need diplomacy, not brute force. And by the way, our military was getting shot down by a few $1,000 drones, and here we are spending a $1.5 trillion almost on a Pentagon budget. We should learn about what more modern warfare is going to take. Final point, Maria, is this: I'm very concerned that this agreement, after 60 days, Iran could start charging toll again in the Strait of Hormuz. It's only 60 days that they've agreed to not charge toll.
Well, again, the president said that if they do not adhere adhere to these promises, then all bets are off, and they could actually go back to bombing. And look, I mean, I appreciate your work on the China Select Committee. You know that, and our audience appreciates it as well, because we understand the implications of communist China undermining the United States. And I want to get back to that in a second. But first, on this deal and on the president's approach to Gaza and to Israel, your former colleague and friend Hillary Clinton weighed in recently, and here's what she said. Watch this.
Made a terrible mistake for himself, his legacy, and for the country. Kept to that plan, we would have had a real contest. And very sadly, I believe whoever emerged from that contest, whether it was the vice president or a governor or a senator or anybody else, would have beaten Donald Trump. 20-point plan for Gaza is actually a pathway to security for Israel, reconstruction for Gaza, and the possibility of self-determination, however defined, for the Palestinians. There are a lot of people who, reject it because Trump did it, but it's the only game in town.
She said Biden destroyed his legacy by running again, and she said President Trump has the right idea on Gaza, that it's the only game in town. Look, Hillary is no fan of Donald Trump. She hates the guy. But she had to admit that his plan for Gaza is the only game in town and the right path for peace. Your reaction?
Well, first, I believe that Secretary Clinton is right that President Biden shouldn't have run for re-election. In retrospect, that is obvious. I don't know what the election outcome would have been. I think it's highly presumptuous to say what would have emerged and who would have won, and that would have been for the American people to decide. But certainly we should have had a competitive primary, and we must have a competitive primary without anyone putting their finger on the scale in 2028. In terms of the Middle East, I guarantee you Secretary Clinton thinks this war in Iran was a mistake, that the JCPOA was a far stronger agreement, and that we didn't need to lose 14 service members and spend hundreds of billions of dollars, both in higher food and gas costs and in terms of the Pentagon military budget, to be able to get this deal. In terms of Gaza, I just respectfully disagree with Secretary Clinton. I don't believe that giving the kind of aid we have to Netanyahu, the blank check, has been constructive. I believe we need Palestinian self-determination. And I've been offended by this Section 224 that would fuse America's military in a way with Israel's. I believe in American sovereignty. I don't think we should be co-producing weapons with any country. And that, to me, it's much more critical to not be continuing to provide this aid for Netanyahu, who, by the way, is insulting the president. I mean, the president keeps telling him, stop bombing Beirut. You don't need to bomb Beirut. And then Netanyahu starts bombing him. And I was like, why isn't Netanyahu, when Donald Trump, when the American president says jump, the only answer from the Israeli prime minister should be how high? That's it.
Wow. Well, look, I mean, with all due respect, you say everything's so obvious right now. I mean, it's so obvious that Biden should not have run. Well, excuse me, back in the day when he was running, you were defending him. So was Chuck Schumer. I met with Joe Biden today. He's so energetic. He does more in a day than I do in a week. I mean, now, come on. We all saw it. I saw what was happening with Joe Biden, and I called it out. But you didn't call it out. Now you're calling out. You say it was so obvious about Iran. Well, how come you didn't do anything about it, okay? How come we allowed Iran to build up ballistic missiles, and then they have these long-range missiles that they actually sent into Diego, the islands there? I mean, so all of this time, it wasn't, you didn't make it so obvious. Now it's so obvious.
Well, look, I think those are two separate issues. If you're going to say, were I and other Democrats wrong in the judgment of not calling earlier for President Biden to not to run for re-election, we were. I've admitted that.
Yeah.
And if I don't make every call correctly in politics, and when I make a call that is incorrect, I'll own up to it. On Iran, though, is a different issue. Iran, many of us were saying that you shouldn't have ripped up the JCPOA, that you shouldn't have had this maximum sanctions campaign. What happened from 2018 when President Trump did that to now allowed Iran to develop enriched uranium, allow them to develop their ballistic missile program.
Because they had the money from Obama. Because they had the money unfrozen from Obama. No.
Because we're
Obama allowed
unfreezing more
Iran
money
to
now.
build up.
We're unfreezing more money now.
They didn't get a cent right now. They haven't gotten a cent yet. They haven't gotten a cent yet.
Well,
okay. Obama unleashed $150 billion for Iran to have access to. Of course, they're going to use that to support proxies who are terrorists. That's what they did.
They did not. The reason we got out of this is because the president ripped up the deal and stopped the IAEA inspections. 97% of that enriched uranium is out. Now we're having to give $300 billion, not from American taxpayer money.
We're not giving
Some of it will be unfrozen, but $300 billion is going to Iran, and we're not even getting all the enriched uranium out. It's being diluted, and you don't have the United Nations Security Council agreement, and you don't have the IAEA inspections. And I'm still supporting the deal because it's better than continuing to fight and better than gas prices going up. But I wish that the lesson for this, Maria, for any future president, is that Americans are tired of these wars. They don't want wars in the Middle East. They don't want to be dragged in. They want diplomacy. Diplomacy actually is better than these wars. And then, by the way, we got to modernize our military because we got in a terrible situation with drone attacks. When we're spending millions of dollars on missiles, they're knocking them down for a few $1,000 drones.
Well, you talk about diplomacy. People look at President Trump as one of the best deal makers out there. He's ended 8 wars, right? And he's always negotiating and deal making, and he does that through diplomacy with corporate America to get their supply chains housed. So, I mean, on diplomacy, I would say that's exactly what President Trump is trying to do. But I don't want to leave the conversation about China. Congressman, you've done a lot in terms of ensuring that China is not able to undermine the country, but they do undermine America at every turn. Would you support removing Chinese companies from U.S. exchanges, since that basically opens up the opportunity for individuals and businesses to buy into Chinese companies, even though they don't even follow the same accounting rules in half the cases, and in fact invest in our number one adversary? Would you support removing those stocks?
Well, I wouldn't suppose a blanket ban, but what the China Committee has said is in cases where Chinese companies are violating American law, then there should be consequences, including possible removal from the stock market. You have this case, which I've talked about, Fuyao in Ohio, in Dayton, that is hiring people who are undocumented, that is paying them a below market wage, that is abusing them and is getting Chinese subsidies, and they're being investigated. We still are waiting from the report from Justice and Homeland Security about that company, and they're putting pressure on American manufacturers, on American glass manufacturers, and taking away jobs. So in that type of case, we need to enforce our laws, and we need to have sanctions, and those sanctions could include removing companies like that from our markets.